Rotting meat, filthy equipment, unsafe handling, these ain't meat companies have factories that are downright disgusting. And yes, you've probably eaten their products. The meat in your freezer right now might come from a facility where workers wear diapers because they're denied bathroom breaks. This isn't fiction, it's the reality at many Tyson Foods plants. Tyson Foods dominates the American meat industry as the largest processor in the country. Their products find their way into countless grocery stores and restaurants across the nation. Their familiar packaging and ubiquitous marketing campaigns project an image of wholesome American farming and quality. But behind the carefully crafted public image lies a troubling reality of unsafe working conditions and questionable food safety practices. The issues at Tyson facilities reveal a disturbing pattern of contamination risks. At their Holcomb, Kansas beef plant, federal inspectors discovered blood-soaked floors and meat residue clinging to equipment that was supposedly sanitized and ready for production. These conditions represent serious contamination hazards that directly lead to foodborne illness outbreaks. Moreover, the chicken processing operations compound these problems through relentless production demands. Workers at multiple facilities handle birds at such accelerated speeds that proper sanitation becomes impossible. I can barely wipe sweat from my eyes, let alone sanitize properly between birds, one worker confided. The frantic pace means feces and bile routinely contaminate the meat as exhausted employees struggle to maintain production quotas. In addition to these shocking findings, a 2019 undercover investigation exposed the degrading reality that some workers resort to urinating while standing at production lines because supervisors routinely deny bathroom breaks. "You either wet yourself or risk losing your job," explained a former employee. This treatment violates basic human dignity while creating obvious food safety hazards as workers handle products in unsanitary conditions. The consequences affect consumers directly. Food safety violations at Tyson facilities have contributed to multiple salmonella outbreaks, including a severe 2018 incident that sickened 246 people across 26 states. Many required hospitalization as contaminated products spread through the national distribution network. When these issues surface through investigations or outbreaks, Tyson follows a predictable response pattern, implementing minimal changes to address specific violations, issuing carefully worded statements about food safety commitments, then gradually returning to the same profit-maximizing practices once public attention fades. While Tyson focuses on concealing safety violations inside their facilities, Smithfield Foods takes a different approach. Their environmental devastation is literally visible from space. Those strange pink lakes dotting the North Carolina landscape aren't natural wonders. They're billions of gallons of untreated pig waste slowly leaking into groundwater and surrounding communities where people can no longer drink from their wells or open their windows on warm days. Smithfield Foods, America's pork giant, manages these concentrated animal feeding operations by housing thousands of pigs in massive warehouse-like structures. Most consumers remain unaware that these facilities generate waste comparable to medium-sized cities. The key difference? Human waste undergoes treatment at municipal facilities, while Smithfield's pig waste gets collected in primitive, open-air lagoons before being sprayed onto nearby fields. The scale is staggering. North Carolina contains over 4,000 waste lagoons, each the size of an Olympic swimming pool, holding approximately 10 billion gallons of untreated waste. This toxic cocktail of pig feces, urine, and industrial cleaning chemicals threatens communities, especially during hurricane season. During Hurricane Florence in 2018, aerial footage captured dozens of these pink lakes breaching their earthen walls and flooding waterways, homes, and drinking water sources. Environmental testing reveals dangerous levels of ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and antibiotic-resistant bacteria developing in the lagoons. For families like the Williamses, who've lived in Duplin County for generations, the consequences are devastating. "My grandson can't play outside most days," explains Elsie Williams. His asthma attacks start within minutes of the spraying. Elderly residents report worsening COPD symptoms, while property values have plummeted as the pervasive stench makes homes virtually unsellable. This environmental catastrophe disproportionately impacts low-income communities of color across North Carolina, creating what environmental justice advocates call sacrifice zones, areas where corporate profit trumps human health. Maria Sanchez, a community organizer, notes, "These companies target our neighborhoods because they know we lack political power to stop them." After decades of complaints, residents saw a glimmer of justice in 2018 when neighbors won a landmark $473 million lawsuit against Smithfield for the nuisance created by these waste lagoons. However, the victory was short-lived when a judge later reduced the award significantly, and the company continues operating these same facilities while spending millions lobbying against stricter environmental regulations. As Smithfield's environmental impact continues largely unchecked, a different kind of threat lurks in America's meat supply. In 2018, a single company was responsible for recalling 7 million pounds of beef in one day, enough meat to make 28 million quarter-pound burgers. Yet, most consumers have never heard the name behind this massive food safety disaster: JBS. This Brazilian meat giant has quietly become a dominant force in American meat processing by acquiring well-known brands like Swift and Pilgrim's Pride. While these familiar labels remain on packaging, the parent company operates in relative obscurity despite being the world's largest meat processor with a troubling safety record. What consumers weren't told was that JBS executives made calculated decisions long before the outbreak occurred. The contaminated beef reached dinner tables across America, resulting in a salmonella outbreak that sent nearly 60 people to hospitals with severe infections. One mother from Ohio described watching her 8-year-old son fight for his life after eating contaminated hamburgers at a family barbecue. The doctor said if we'd waited another day to bring him in, he might not have made it. Internal documents later revealed JBS deliberately sacrificed proper sanitation to maintain rapid processing speeds. This pattern continued into 2019, with JBS recalling another 100,000 pounds of ground beef due to E. coli contamination. The situation worsened when undercover footage emerged from their Pilgrim's Pride facilities, showing birds visibly covered in fecal matter being processed for human consumption. After these headline-making recalls, JBS implements highly visible but temporary safety measures, just enough to satisfy regulators and calm public concerns. Company documents show these measures gradually disappear once attention fades, reverting to the same cost-cutting practices that caused the original contamination. JBS continues securing multi-million-dollar government contracts to supply meat for school lunches and federal food programs. Their political connections and financial resources allow them to weather scandals through strategic lobbying and relatively minor fines that smaller companies could never survive. With operations spanning multiple continents and controlling significant portions of the beef, pork, and chicken supply chains in America, JBS has positioned itself as too big to fail in the meat industry, giving it extraordinary leverage with both regulators and retail partners. The meat industry's too big to fail problem extends beyond beef into America's most consumed protein. While you might take careful precautions when handling raw chicken, few consumers understand that those safety measures are necessary, largely because of how companies like Cargill process poultry in the first place. Cargill stands as a behemoth in the American food system, a privately held corporation that processes millions of turkeys and chickens every day across its nationwide network of facilities. This immense scale has allowed Cargill to become one of the country's primary suppliers of poultry products while operating largely outside public scrutiny. What makes Cargill's poultry operations particularly concerning are the conditions documented in their processing plants. At their Waco, Texas facility, USDA inspectors have repeatedly found chicken carcasses with visible fecal contamination moving through processing without proper cleaning or rejection. Workers report processing speeds reaching an astonishing 175 birds per minute. Imagine an assembly line racing against time, where workers' hands blur with motion and spaces for error vanish. At this pace, thorough sanitation becomes physically impossible, creating a direct pathway for contamination to reach consumers' kitchens. The consequences can be deadly, as demonstrated by Monica Jensen, a Minnesota mother who lost her 77-year-old father to listeriosis in 2011. He was among 7 people who died in a Cargill turkey-linked listeria outbreak that sickened another 130 people across 26 states. The scale of this tragedy should have prompted fundamental changes in the company's approach to sanitation. Yet, just 2 years after this deadly outbreak, government inspectors documented remarkably similar sanitation problems at the very same facility. This pattern reveals Cargill's approach to food safety as essentially a financial calculation, weighing the costs of occasional outbreaks against implementing more expensive and thorough sanitation practices across all facilities. Part of what enables this behavior is Cargill's extraordinary political influence. The company routinely deploys its lobbying power to fight regulations that would require slower processing speeds or more rigorous inspection protocols. When faced with evidence of sanitation failures, Cargill typically issues carefully crafted statements about isolated incidents rather than acknowledging systemic problems. For consumers, this means the chicken or turkey on your dinner plate has likely passed through a system designed to prioritize volume over cleanliness. The fecal soup nickname workers use for certain processing tanks describes the reality of how poultry is handled before reaching grocery stores. Disconnect between marketing and reality doesn't get more stark than with our next company. Purdue Farms has invested millions in portraying itself as a family-friendly operation where chickens enjoy natural, humane conditions. Their commercials feature smiling farmers walking among seemingly happy birds in spacious, clean environments. But this carefully crafted image crumbles when we look behind the curtain. Chickens have been genetically engineered to grow at an alarming rate, reaching market weight in just 47 days. About half the time it took chickens in the 1950s. This rapid growth resembles a vehicle accelerated to dangerous speeds with failing brakes. Their breast muscles develop so quickly that many birds can barely stand, their underdeveloped legs buckling under their unnaturally heavy bodies. These birds often spend their final weeks lying in litter soaked with feces and urine, developing painful burns on their chests and legs. Inside Purdue's grow houses, conditions harm workers alongside animals. Ventilation systems fail to adequately remove ammonia that builds up from thousands of confined birds. Employees suffer burning eyes, persistent coughs, and long-term respiratory damage from daily exposure to these fumes and harsh chemicals used throughout the facilities. Worker injury reports reveal a troubling pattern. Purdue employees develop repetitive motion injuries at rates exceeding industry averages, with many suffering debilitating carpal tunnel syndrome from performing identical cutting motions thousands of times per shift. Chemical burns and respiratory issues from airborne contaminants constitute the most common medical complaints. A 2015 Mercy for Animals undercover investigation captured footage that horrified viewers. Chickens with broken wings dragging themselves through filth, open wounds festering without treatment, and birds gasping for breath in ammonia-laden air, all being processed for human consumption. Purdue's response? They blamed contract farmers who raised the birds, despite requiring these farmers to follow Purdue's strict protocols or risk losing their livelihoods. Purdue's commitment to secrecy speaks volumes. They actively support ag-gag legislation, laws criminalizing undercover investigations and whistleblowing at agriculture facilities. While publicly promoting transparency, they've invested millions lobbying for laws that would make it illegal to document the very conditions they claim don't exist in their facilities. The battle against transparency continues with our next meat giant, but this time, the stakes involve life-threatening contamination that has sent children to intensive care units. National Beef, America's fourth largest beef processor, supplies millions of pounds of product to supermarkets and restaurants across the country, but their safety record reveals a troubling pattern of dangerous outbreaks. The company's Liberal, Kansas processing facility has become particularly notorious among food safety inspectors. USDA records document a disturbing practice. Meat that tested positive for dangerous pathogens was processed on the same equipment as clean products. This cross-contamination creates a perfect environment for spreading bacteria throughout massive batches of ground beef. I watched supervisors routinely pressure inspectors to overlook visible contamination just to keep production moving, revealed a former employee who worked 3 years at the Liberal plant. Point out fecal matter on carcasses, and you'd quickly find yourself assigned to the most difficult station or facing reduced hours. This culture of silence allowed contaminated products to continue down the production line, eventually reaching consumers' tables. The consequences have been severe. In 2013, National Beef recalled over 50,000 pounds of ground beef contaminated with E. coli, the pathogen that produces toxins causing severe kidney damage, especially in children. By the time the recall was issued, several people had already fallen ill, with multiple children requiring intensive care treatment for life-threatening kidney complications. A 2018 investigation by food safety experts confirmed these weren't isolated incidents. Between production runs, cleaning procedures were frequently rushed or incomplete. Swab testing revealed bacteria harboring residue on conveyor belts, grinding equipment, and cutting surfaces, contaminating subsequent meat batches. These dangerous conditions persist because National Beef has systematically fought against increased safety regulations. Company executives have invested millions in lobbying efforts against requirements for more frequent pathogen testing and slower processing speeds that would allow for proper inspection. When confronted with evidence of their facility's contamination issues, they've consistently characterized additional safety measures as unnecessary costs that would burden consumers, while children continue to suffer the real costs in hospital beds across America. National Beef isn't alone in prioritizing profits over safety. Hormel Foods, the maker of iconic products like Spam that sit in millions of American pantries, operates under a shocking regulatory loophole that allows them to essentially inspect themselves, with devastating consequences for both workers and consumers. What makes Hormel's operations particularly troubling is their implementation of the USDA's HIMP program, or Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point-Based Inspection Models project. This controversial system allows Hormel to replace federal inspectors with their own employees on production lines. When company profits directly conflict with thorough inspection, safety inevitably suffers. Ever wonder what happens when production lines move so fast that proper inspection becomes impossible? The consequences appear clearly in government records. At Hormel's Austin, Minnesota plant, where Spam is produced, line speeds have accelerated to dangerous levels. Workers face such extreme production quotas that many resort to wearing adult diapers during shifts, as bathroom breaks are effectively prohibited. One former employee described the experience as working like a machine until your body breaks down. The human toll is staggering. Workers develop severe repetitive stress injuries while processing up to 1,300 hogs per hour, creating a production line that essentially inspects itself, leaving critical blind spots in safety checks. These accelerated speeds harm more than just workers. USDA reports document how Hormel supervisors regularly override inspectors' concerns about contamination. In one disturbing instance, government inspectors flagged pork with visible fecal matter, only to have Hormel management insist the meat continues down the production line. These contaminated products then make their way to store shelves across America. The situation worsened in 2015 when an undercover investigation at Quality Pork Processors, Hormel's primary supplier, revealed horrifying animal handling practices. Pigs were beaten, dragged, and improperly stunned before slaughter, creating additional contamination risks as stressed animals release more pathogens. These same facilities were granted even faster line speeds under Hormel's special regulatory status. Perhaps most concerning is how the system continues despite documented failures. Following reports of neurological illnesses among workers exposed to aerosolized pig brains at their Minnesota facility, Hormel implemented minimal changes while continuing to lobby for even less regulatory oversight. Their political influence has paid off handsomely. In 2019, the USDA expanded the self-inspection model to more pork producers, despite objections from food safety experts. Foster Farms presents itself as a family company committed to quality poultry products, but behind that carefully crafted image lies a company with one of the most troubling food safety records in the industry. The shocking reality, when a devastating salmonella outbreak was traced to Foster Farms chicken in 2013, federal investigators couldn't legally force a recall. This regulatory gap exists because the USDA classifies salmonella as natural and expected in raw poultry, effectively giving companies permission to sell contaminated products. The 2013 and 2014 outbreak devastated families like the Johnsons, whose 8-year-old daughter spent 3 weeks hospitalized with antibiotic-resistant salmonella after eating Foster Farms chicken at a family barbecue. She was among 634 people sick across 29 states, with a hospitalization rate of 38%. Twice what's typically seen in salmonella outbreaks. Every contaminated package represented a potential health crisis waiting to enter consumers' homes. Throughout this outbreak, Foster Farms facilities in California continued operating despite alarming conditions documented by USDA inspectors. Live cockroaches crawling on equipment, visible fecal matter on carcasses, and mold growing on facility walls. Each day, these facilities ship thousands of potentially contaminated products to unsuspecting consumers. Internal company documents later revealed Foster Farms had been aware of elevated salmonella rates in their chicken for years before the outbreak. Their testing data showed contamination rates significantly higher than industry averages, yet they continued production without addressing fundamental sanitation issues or implementing more rigorous testing protocols. When hundreds fell ill from their products, Foster Farms deployed a classic industry defense: consumer blame. Company spokespersons emphasized that chicken should be cooked to 165 degrees and handled with proper sanitation, deflecting responsibility from their processing facilities onto home cooks. This approach allowed them to continue operating with minimal operational changes. Their commitment to food safety proved hollow. By 2018, Foster Farms products were again linked to another salmonella outbreak, demonstrating that any improvements made after 2013 were insufficient or temporary. Despite repeated incidents, regulatory frameworks offered little consequence for selling what amounted to contaminated chicken. The company continued prioritizing processing speed over thorough sanitation, knowing they could operate within a system that permitted selling potentially dangerous products. After exploring these 8 meat processing giants, one thing becomes abundantly clear. These aren't isolated incidents, but systematic problems embedded in industrial meat production. The companies follow the same playbook: accelerate processing speeds, fight regulatory oversight, and calculate that recalls cost less than proper safety measures. This broken system persists because federal agencies lack sufficient authority, while the revolving door between industry and regulation weakens accountability. Are your food choices inadvertently supporting these practices? By purchasing from smaller producers with transparent practices, choosing plant-based alternatives, or reducing meat consumption, we can collectively shift the market toward companies that prioritize safety over speed.